Hello, Ujjwal. Hi, Olga. We're switching to English because, yeah, why not? I know that Ujjwal can speak Russian a little bit. Um,
Uh, Probably not enough for a conference, but maybe okay.
yeah. Well, I think that if you can speak JavaScript, you can speak Russian because they share same common phrases that I cannot share here live because they kind of a bit, you know. So, Olga, you're working in Yandex, and you should work with dates every day. So, is that, is that so?
Well, I had my share of working with dates for sure because I was working in a MapReduce interface. But why do you say so?
Because today we will talk about a new proposal that will help everyone to work with dates in JavaScript, dates and everything around that. I
But to
think so.
be completely honest, I was like missing microseconds. That was hell for me.
Yeah. And yeah, Ujjwal, I know that you are TC39 delegate and you are actually a champion for this proposal. And is it hard to be a TC39 delegate and how it usually works for you?
Uh, no, it's super easy. Everybody just completely hates each other, and we're constantly fighting about if a option should be named week or weeks. And then I remember we had like a discussion for that like for 2 hours last week. But yeah, TC39 is great because we have so much pressure, and everybody expects the language to be the best, but it's also designed by humans, right? So we miss out on some things, and it's always frustrating because in JavaScript nothing really dies. There's no version 2 or version 3 like in Python. So yeah, everything is something you need to live with for the rest of your life. So there's so much pressure, but we try. We try to deliver.
Yeah. And so, so what do you think? Why temporal this new proposal is so important? Because well, actually, yeah, previously we worked with the Moment.js and other libraries, so maybe like we used to pain.
Yeah, it's there's a weird sort of sadism with associated with dates and times in JavaScript. Unfortunately, that doesn't need to be this way, right? The way we deal with JavaScript dates and times on the language level is severely outdated and outmoded. Even it's taken from Java in 1995, I think, and times have changed since then, right? And programming has changed since then. So Temporal is a way for us to come up with a modern API that also, of course, that tries to solve all the problems that Moment, for example, solves. But since the proposal was started by the original Moment maintainers, it also tries to solve some of the problems that cannot be solved by just creating a module. Right? There's problems like internationalization, which if you do solve them, they would require lots of increase in bundle size. And then there's problems like nanosecond precision, which just cannot be solved unless the language adds feature for that. So yeah, it's hopefully dates and times would be much improved in JavaScript after this.
Yeah. And I think we should start. So that's your time, and of course we would have Q&A after your session and discussion zones. So, and dear viewers, please join our chats and discussion zones. You have them in your player. And let's begin.
Thanks. Okay, so let us start. Hello and welcome, everyone. The talk is another cheesily titled talk by me. It's called How to Outsmart Time. I suppose a lot of you already know me, but if you don't, hi, I'm Ujjwal. And this talk is about building futuristic JavaScript applications using Temporal. So, in case you didn't know about me, it's my pleasure to tell you about myself. I am Ujjwal. You can find me at RiserCookin. That's my username, basically everywhere, including GitHub or Twitter, wherever you want to shout at me. I am a compiler's hacker at this cool place called Igalia, which is a free software consultancy in Galicia. Uh, we work on browsers, compilers, standards, like I'm going to tell you about, and a bunch of Linux tech, for example. It's really cool. I am a TC39 delegate and a temporal champion, as Evgeny pointed out. And apart from that, I work on Node.js core from time to time. But that said, let's talk about a quick recap, right? I gave a presentation previously about this subject, and so maybe it's a good idea to get back to some of the things that I discussed back then and quickly go over them. So the first point is, as I was saying just right now, date is severely outdated. It has serious issues. The origins of this date object come from way back when Java originally added the first date object. It's so old, it's not very usable. There's a lot of popular third-party libraries for date and time handling in JavaScript. The popularity of these libraries in themselves are a thorn in your back if you're, it's a curse and a boon at the same time, right? If you develop a programming language and a single third-party library is very popular, this means that there's something wrong with the standard library, right? But anyway, there's quite a few problems that still exist, and somebody needs to do something, right? For example, nanoseconds precision, as I said, is not something that can be added on the level of Moment.js. So some of the original maintainers of Moment.js came together and started an initiative called Temporal. Temporal is all about creating a state-of-the-art date and time handling system in JavaScript. Over time, a lot of people came together with the two big goals, right? And this is, in my personal understanding, this is the most beautiful thing about Temporal. This is the thing that makes it so special. It makes it one of the most ambitious proposals that I've seen in JavaScript, because there's two classes of proposals in TC39, right? For example, we're discussing things like array destructuring or other proposals like object has or promise any. All these proposals are introducing things that were kind of already available from time to time, and they're targeted towards developers who want to focus on common use cases. They make things easier to do. They make things ergonomic to do. And then there's features like vgraphs and finalization registry, to name a few, which introduce very new features, very complicated use cases for the 5% or 1% development cases where you need those kind of things, right? And the beauty of Temporal, so Temporal has a bunch of powerful features like local calendar support, where you can support calendars like the Islamic calendar or the Hebrew calendar. And there's custom time zones, custom calendars, and as I mentioned, nanoseconds. All these things cater to that sort of power user clique of people, group of people. But then at the same time, Temporal tries to work on a very ergonomic API that can allow you to build applications that are really common, right? And commonly used applications in date and time specifically in a very small amount of code. And this is the thing that we're going to focus on in this talk. So be ready to have your mind blown by how powerful the API is. I cannot go in more detail. I would love to, but I cannot. I already gave a talk about it at the same conference. So actually 1 year ago, right? But yeah, if you want to check it out, please check out that talk. Somebody should hopefully drop a link in the chat, probably after this talk because this is live. But yeah, please check that out also. So the big change, the big difference, the big news from me is to you is that Temporal is now stage 3, which is great, right? Yay. But we don't know what that means. So let me quickly go over what is the implication of that? What's the meaning of that? Stage 3 means that all the tiny details of the proposal, they have been discussed. We have sat around and discussed every nook and corner and every edge case of the proposal so far. The specification text that we wrote for the implementers, like different browsers, has been approved by the committee. The committee is now satisfied with the overall design of the proposal. And so now is the time for us, for implementers to start implementing Temporal, and for developers, for a lot of you, for example, to start using it, including in production. There's now going to be Polyfill implementations. As I'm going to tell you soon, there's a Polyfill that we have created, the Temporal champions have created themselves, and there's hopefully going to be a lot more strong Polyfills coming in soon. There's also going to be browser implementations. Browsers take a little bit more time to write and ship a feature. They have so much to do, right? And they're also going to write in C++ in both cases. But that's going to happen soon enough. For the few of you who are not completely familiar with the stage process and what the stage 3 mean, what's stage 1 and 2, and is there a stage 4 and 5? Let me quickly go over the stage process real quick. It all starts at stage 0, at which point it's called a straw person, right? I mean, like you draw a straw person on a notepad. Straw persons are just an idea, right? You can come up with an idea, you can come up with a problem that you want to solve in the programming language, and you can create your own stage 0 straw person proposal. It's just a repository in your GitHub account or something like that, right? Once you start to feel, and yeah, it's really interesting that you're sitting in Holy.js. If you've attended Holy.js before, or maybe even in this edition, there's a contest called TCXX where you create your own stage 0 proposals. So this is exactly the same thing. Next stage is when you start getting more serious about the proposal. It's the actual proposal stage. It's stage 1. You present the proposal in front of the committee. The committee can accept that proposal, and then it goes to stage 1. At that point, you start describing the shape of a solution. You start vaguely describing how the problem could be solved, and the committee decides all of this based on if they think that it's a real problem that needs to be solved, and if they like the kind of solutions you're proposing. There can be multiple solutions in this phase, but the general task during this time is to identify the potential blockers that can come in while solving this problem. Next up, we got stage 2, at which point it's no longer just a proposal, it's a draft. The special point about a draft is that now it's not just wishy-washy proposal, it's written down, right? That's what a draft means. So now you start describing the precise syntactic and semantic details. If there's some syntax involved, like, I don't know, big integers or class fields, private class fields, static class features, you start describing the syntax, how those things will look. If it's like temporal, you would describe the semantics, how things would work behind the scenes. And generally, you narrow down to a single way of solving things, more or less. Next stage is where temporal is right now, which is the candidate stage. At this point, we decide, stage 2, we spend like a lot of time sitting down in our chairs talking about the design. Now we decide we've done that. We can no longer do more by just sitting down. So now further feedback is needed from implementation. So now we need to actually write down some code, implement it in some browsers, maybe in some JavaScript engines. And also we need feedback from users, people who want to use that in production in their different applications. So now we start building things and start taking any feedback, see if things are okay. And then once everything is decided, it's okay, it's shipped in all browsers. Actually, at least 2 browsers is the exact thing that we need. It's called finished. It's added to the main language spec. It's tested, and the tests are added forever in the test suite that we have, test 262, so that any new browsers, any new JavaScript engines would consider that feature a part of the language itself. And it's ready for addition to the main standard. So what changed until now, right? I mean, I think the last talk was approximately a year ago, maybe a little less than a year ago. But what changed in that time, right? Before we reached stage three, because after stage three, now we're not changing anything. If you remember the absolute class, I was talking to you about absolute last time, and I said an absolute is an instant in time. Well, we realized it's why not just name it instant, right? It's a better name. So we started calling it instant. I remember I said that instant was one of the names that we were considering, and we decided to move it back to instant. So now it's called instant. Date, time, and all its friends, date, time, separately, year, month, Monday, they're all prefixed with plain. So if you think about it, date time is now plain date time, which begs the question, right? If there is a plain date time, what is the opposite of a plain date time? What is not plain date time? So this brings me to one of the or maybe the biggest addition of the time. We added a new class, a brand new class, which does everything. It's the Superman class. Uh, it's called zone date time. So it is a date time with a zone because it contains a time zone in it. It can resolve to an instant in time, right? So it's super powerful. But we'll discuss why you might or might not need it. We added new functionality, important functionality, right? Rounding. We're going to talk about it later in the slides, but I'm pretty sure a lot of you would find that useful. We have improved the ergonomics. A lot of rough edges have been cleaned up. If you see some of the functions are just so much easier to call now. Regarding the polyfill that we were working on back then and have still worked on over the year, we have produced various cleanups and bug fixes. The polyfill is much more stable now. And we have reduced subclassing support. So this is not a temporal thing per se, but it's a big change. So and it is a big change for something that I talked about a lot last time. So I wanted to make this sure. ECMAScript, the language itself, the JavaScript, is moving away from allowing subclasses of the core API, right? So far you could subclass array, you could subclass string, and in that vein, Temporal had allowed you to subclass date to create your own date, yeah, right? You could create a MyDate class or something like that. And then that support is being reduced and removed in most cases. So, proceed with caution here. Just to give you a better idea of the exact types, I remember I had a similar diagram to this last time, but the big addition here, so on the left is the exact time types. You see, wait, I don't know which way my camera is pointing, but on one side you have instant, right, which is the exact time type. You always know, exactly how many nanoseconds have passed. And on the right side you have these fuzzy time types, right, which don't have the exact time in mind, but they point to the time and the date like human beings talk about them, right? They talk to a calendar date and about a vol clock time. So you can say 10 in the morning, and that's plain time. That's not an instant in time because you're not talking about 10 a.m. on that day in this time zone. So for those cases, when you have all the information and you want to the best of both worlds, there's zone date time, and of course there's time zone and calendar, which are in the middle, sort of drawing from both sides, and then there's durations that are used for doing math everywhere. Just to quickly go over this and give a quick summary, instant and plain types, they work as previously talked about. They work as you would expect them to work. Zone date time is the combination of an instant and a time zone because it has a time zone as well as the instant. It can always, it has the API surface. Inside it has the exactness of an instant, right? As I said, but because it has a time zone also, it on the outside it can act like a date time. You can ask it what day is it and what time is it. It doesn't speak exclusively in terms of nanoseconds since the epoch like an instant does. So it's a really useful type if you need it. All arithmetic operations are done using durations. a date and another date. The difference between these two dates would always be a duration. Same with a date time or zone date time, anything really. Time zones are used in zone date times primarily, as I said before. The direct conversion is removed. So if you remember last time, we talked about how you can directly convert from an instant to a date time, and then using a time zone, and then vice versa. Now that's no longer permitted. You can, of course, convert each of them to a zone date time and then get to the other point. But the direct conversion is no longer possible because we're not convinced that people would use that uh, too much. But if you like that, maybe let us know. Calendars are used for date and for friends. So anything above a date, like a plain date time or a zone date time, would also have a calendar, and anything below, like year, month, Monday, would also have a calendar. Everything that deals with dates or something related would have a calendar attached to it. We use month codes instead of indexes. Now that's something that feels a bit weird, but let me walk you through this, right? So we talk about months in in the sense of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and so on, where one means January, and February, and so on. But that's not true for all the calendars, right? In our calendar, like the Gregorian calendar that we use always, there's only a leap month of February, which has like a leap day. But some calendars have leap months, right? Full months that may or may not exist in a year, right? Like the Hebrew calendar, for example, that they use in Israel, at least, and in many communities all over the world. They have leap months. There's the Hindu calendar that they use in India. They also have leap months. So instead of using a number, which may or may not exist in the next year, we're using a month code, which means that every year has a unique month code. For the Gregorian calendar, nothing changes. But if you're using a special calendar that has these leap months, you'll notice something cool. All other features can be added still in a V2 proposal, though, because we've finalized this one. If you have any further ideas, we already had some. We have started putting them in a V2 proposal so they can be done later on. The serialization format that we use here is something interesting. So last time we talked about how we use a standardized format for this that is specified in ISO 8601. This is the number of that document that specifies this. And the I document for called RFC 3339. They're both old and limited. They're older than me in some cases. I think at least one of them was written in 1998 and one short after. So yeah, they're old, right? Ever since then, things have improved, and for example, we start considering time zones very important. So there's ad hoc formats all over the internet that talk about like an additional time zone. If you're using any modern databases, if you're using PostgreSQL, if you're using Oracle, if you're writing code in Java, for Christ's sake, you're using one of these formats because they have the same format, but at the end they put the time zone in some way, maybe after a space, maybe after like a bracket, something. Because we're talking about calendars, this is something that's not been done before, but in the mainstream at least. But now we need to add the calendar into this mix, and so there is the need for a standard format. Sadly, even though the formats that I talked about, the ones with the time zone, are popular on the internet, they're used in Linux, they're used in all these databases. They're not standardized, so you're never sure if they're going to be accepted. And there's like a million of them. So we want to standardize a generalized extension format so that it's generalizable. You can use that with the past, which is time zones, the present, which is calendars, and anything that may come in the future. For example, some people like time scales, or I don't know, you can specify a time scale for Mars time, and something like that. So I've written down a draft for addressing this. It's called this, so you can Google that up and find it. It's called DateTime Extended because it extends the original DateTime format. And we're working through the standards processes to get it to a standardized, like, basically. To all my friends who didn't understand a word, like, what was I talking about? ISO, ITF, RC. The ISO is just a big standards body. It's called the International Organization for Standardization. It's an international standards body that basically all countries respect. They standardize everything from these DateTime formats to, I don't know, agricultural engineering and metallurgy. They do a bunch of cool stuff, and they're basically one of the biggest organizations for standardizing stuff. They produce a format for this called ISO 8601. Wait a second. Okay. I'm back. So the body of people, right, the group of people who deal with these things is called ISO TC159 Working Group 5. It's a little vague why they're called that, but it's just like TC39. It's a number, right? It's in a sequence. The ISO cannot do these things by themselves, so they actually liaison this stuff to another body called CalConnect. So there's a bit of work going on here. The body that I'm working with these days is, because of this complicated structure, I'm working with another body that is much more simple, right? Because it's all engineers. It's called ITF, the Internet Engineering Task Force. ITF has standardized basically every protocol under the sun, from HTTP to FTP to whatever weird stuff you're using for internet right now. I'm like, for example, we're using WebRTC, right, for this video stream stuff, and that's IETF standard as well. So IETF publishes these standards in the form of RFCs. The full form of an RFC is a request for comment, but that doesn't really capture what the meaning is. It's just a standard that is published by the RFC. Once it's published, it never goes away. You can create a new standard that deprecates the old one, but once it's up uh, forever. Right now, what I've written is not an RFC. It is called what is an ID. So it's an individual draft, because it's a draft that I wrote myself as an individual. And once I go through some of the processes, hopefully in the next couple of months, it would be published as an RFC. And then, JavaScript can move ahead and use it, and everybody else can accept those strings as well. Just to give a quick idea about how these things look like, on the leftmost side, you have the green box, which includes the original format, right? Now, if you notice, except for the calendars, all the types that I talked about previously, right? The plain types, all of them, and also instant, they can all be represented using this time, right? So it's not that bad, except for the fact that it doesn't have calendar, which is our biggest problem. Now, for zone date time, it's also bad, because we need the time zone extension as well. The time zone extension, as I said, it's not something standardized. It's something that Java does, and a bunch of other people picked up, but it needs to be standardized. So we are standardizing that as well, and then we add a generalized, a generic extension format, using which I've specified the calendar here. So you can use that to specify anything. But yeah, that's how we specify the calendars at the end. So that's generally a quick idea of how things work with Temporal. So I hope that was clear, and maybe we can discuss about these things for a couple of minutes. Olga, what do you think?
Yes, we should. Okay, so the first question that comes to mind is, so time zones, what are they? Because I see a time offset in the green square, like plus 0.9. What's the difference?
Okay, so with the human time zone, you mean?
Yes.
Yeah, so that is a fun one, right? It's something that has haunted me, not only with developers but also people standardizing things in IETF, and so this is something that I've explained to a lot of people. But the timestamp itself, right, the instant in time that you're calculating is still in the green box. It's still the original format, right? So if you're calculating an instant in time, you still just need this information. You don't need any additional information. So if there is a mismatch, for example, between this and this is the canonical information because it is determining what instant in time you're in. This is additional time zone information, right? So for example, you can see that we had to specify both this and this, right? You cannot just skip the offset and say, hey, we just added the time zone extension. You can figure out the offset yourself. No, we need the offset in order to resolve the time. The time zone extension is an additional information that can give me an idea which time zone this person is in, right? If you're doing +0, you could be both in the UK. I mean, UK does +0 for a good half of the year, or you could be in Iceland, which does +0 for all the year, right? But then if you give me a date, right? So let's think about that hypothetical. You give me a time which has a timestamp that says +0, and then you say, okay, add 7 months to this time, right? How do I add, or maybe it's a different time, and you say add few weeks to this time or few days to this time. How can I tell if you're if there would be DST in there or not? If you're in the UK, there can be DST in there. If you're in Iceland, there's not going to be DST in there. And there's I hope there's a bunch of other places south on the date line on zero that do something else. Maybe they don't do DST. Maybe they do reverse DST, unlike UK. So that's where this comes in handy, this time zone extension. But apart from that, you don't need that time zone extension to actually resolve a time itself.
So to summarize, it's additional information that can help us work with time even better.
Yeah, exactly. It's additional information that is useful in some cases, but not always. And the actual source of truth is the offset here. That's what I'm using to know the exact value.
Cool. So do you think we should continue now?
Okay, that works for me. Okay, do you see my slides updating?
Sure.
Okay, so let's make an invoice calculator. So here's I started building an invoice calculator. Just the smallest problem was that I'm not good at programming. But let's try. Let's try. I'll try with you. So step one is to pick a date time picker, right? If you're building something with dates and times, you need a way to get input. Now, if if you're on a front end application, right? A lot of you are front end developers. A lot of my friends, front developers, they would probably do something with a date time picker that would give them the value of this date and time. That's not necessary for everyone. If you're running Node, or if you're getting the values from an API, maybe you're building, like, I don't know, a Spotify client, and you're getting these values from the API, then it doesn't matter. If you're reading a CSV file or something, then it doesn't matter. But if you're doing a front end thing, you would need a date time picker. Now, these days, I've heard that front end developers generally pick the date time picker component, not based on anything else, because they're all the same feature wise mostly, but something that fits their rendering strategy. If you're using React, you pick a certain library. If you're using Vue or Svelte, you pick something else. The important point here is that, as I discussed, these objects, they accept ISO 8601 strings, so they should return an ISO 8601 strings. This is the beauty of standardization, right? Because it's a standard format, all the libraries can agree to work together on that. So That's what they do, and hopefully the new standard would also be accepted by all these libraries. Now, since these are JavaScript libraries, and since temporal is supposed to be the way you do dates and times in JavaScript, it can ideally return a temporal type, right? I mean, nobody's going to use it outside of JavaScript. uh, Hopefully it will soon. Maybe I would cash in on that and make a few npm modules to get really famous. But yeah, for now they don't, and they don't really need to. And as I said, if you're using an API, then that would not return a temporal type. That would instead return a string. There's already many you can pick from. I just went on the internet for like 2 minutes and I found one called React DateTime Picker. That's for React. And if you're using nothing, or if you're using jQuery, you can use DateTime Picker, which is another library. Now, once you have the string, you can just put that string into temporal.plain.datetime.from. It's like a factory method, if you call it. It's a static constructor, not the new kind of constructor, but it's a static method on the plain datetime class that returns a new instant. So you can say temporal plain datetime from, and you can put in your string in here, and that would create a new plain datetime from this. So you can have all your time values, and you can throw them all here, and you can get plain date times for each of your values, right? Now that you have two date times, right, a starting point and an ending point, you can find the difference between these two, right? You have the point where you started working and the point at which you stopped working, and you can find the time during which you worked by finding the difference between these 2 points. Now, these, as I mentioned, this is all arithmetic, so this is done in the form of duration, right? A duration is the duration of time during which you worked. A duration note here can both be positive and negative. So please note that the direction here is important. The sign is important. This should be noted, especially when adding durations. So let's say that you charge by the hour, you work for a total of 50 days, and you have a start time and end time for all the 50 days, right? So you end up with a list of 50 durations that you want to add. And so if one of them is negative, you're not going to notice that after adding, the result was much less than you actually worked, and then you're charging less money, which is not something we want to do, right? So especially when you're dealing with money, make sure that you note that the sign is okay. You can check the sign in your code by calling dot sign. The dot sign thingy would return either +1 or -1, and you can be sure that the sign is what you need it to be. In this case, we're probably going for +1. You can also just say, you know what, screw this, all of this, and you can call duration.abs. This is a function which gives you the absolute value. So if you have a negative or a positive value, it would just give you the positive absolute value. So that's the duration that we had. Now, to actually do this, you can call it two ways, right? Because it's both positive and negative. So let's go through this, right? First, we have earlier, which is a plain date time that is on the 9th of January 2020, and on midnight, right? And then later is on the same day, but it's not midnight, it's actually 4 a.m. So it's later than earlier. That's why it's later. Now, you can either call since or until to find the result. And the direction actually depends on which function you use. So you can call since on the later, right? So you have later.since earlier, like in the first line here. So the late time is the receiver, and earlier is actually the argument. And if you do it this way, the sign is going to be positive because, later, since earlier is in a positive direction, right? And if I'm doing largest unit hours here, it would give me 4 hours. And if you're calling until, you need to flip the sign. So now earlier becomes the receiver, and later becomes the first argument. If you did it the same way, if you did later dot until earlier, then it would be a negative duration. We don't want a negative duration. which is why we're doing it this way. And if you do in minutes, it would be, whatever the equivalent of 4 hours is in minutes, which is 240 minutes. Now you got to find out how much you worked. Now that you have a list of durations, right? Most probably every day how much you worked, you can add them all together. So my friends like clean code and functional programming can do something like this. You have a durations array, you can call dot reduce on that. So you can have a total and a current, and then you can just add the current into the total. So that would, give you the total value. And then you can call new temporal duration to start this from a 0 value. This will create a duration with 0 everything, 0 seconds, everything. Or if you like to write messy code like I do, you can just call for each and then add to that. Now, one thing to notice here is that the total here, you can also create duration using the from method, like we talked about plain date time. The interchange format, the serialization format, like we talked about, for those is slightly different from the one that we have for durations. So we are gonna talk about this format, right? It looks like 0 seconds. You see the 0 and the S, but it's a little different. So let's talk about this just a bit. But remember that if some of these durations can be negative, then you probably need to call ABS here. So maybe you need to find the absolute value. The duration serialization format is really simple. So if you have a duration with 1 years, 2 months, 3 weeks, 4 days, 5 hours, 6 minutes, 7 seconds, and so on, if you find the toString, which is the serialization format of this, you will have P, which stands for period. It's just to mark that this string is a duration string and nothing else, to make sure that we're not parsing the wrong thing. So this is the P, forget the P. Then you have 1Y, which is 1 years, 2M, which is 2 months, 3W, which is 3 weeks, 4D, and so on. There is a T here to demonstrate that now is the time units, the smaller units. And then you have 5 hours, 6 minutes, and 7 seconds. These can be fractions. So any of these can be years 1.5 and weeks 3.27. But I would want you to be careful here. Why? Because if you use if you use the fractions, the decimals in the string, that's accepted by the polyfill. But the polyfill is written in JavaScript, which means that it has all the weird math rules that JavaScript has. If you're familiar with IEEE doubles, that's what JavaScript uses for numbers. So there's a few fractions that cannot be represented using that. I think 2 by 3 is one of those, for example, or something like that. I might be forgetting. But yeah, some of the fractions, they cannot be represented using a string in the polyfill. So if you're using the polyfill, if you're writing code that might be run in an environment which uses the polyfill, and you're using a fractional durations, then I'd recommend that you use this object notation instead of the string notation, if possible. But yeah. And now that you have the durations, now you got to charge them money by the hour. So depending on the contract, you might want to charge per day or per hour. I don't know. A lot of us charge by per month, but your mileage may vary. The math is easy. The math to do this is easy. In fact, it's so easy that it's built into Temporal. You don't even have to do anything. You can just call a single function. For a big duration can have many units, right? As we talked about just now, it can have everything from years to seconds, and of course up till nanoseconds if you use the objects for nanoseconds, or if you use 0.2 seconds in the string. So for bringing all of these into a single unit, you can call the total method on a duration. So for example, if I worked for a total of 1,000,000 seconds, let's see how many 24-hour days, or actually how many hours I worked during this time. So if I say duration dot total unit hours for this duration, which is 1,000,000 seconds, you would see that I worked for a total of 277.777 milliseconds hours during this time. So that's all good, right? We have seconds, we convert that to hours, and that's simple. You can tell me, I think, I hope, how many seconds there are in an hour. At least you could calculate that. I can calculate that. Okay, it's 3600. But we know that math, right? It's not that complicated. But when I start going above hours, things start getting complicated, right? If I ask you how many hours are in a day, uh, there's no good way to tell. I mean, yeah, most people think that there is 24 hours in a day, but not all days have 24 hours, right? During daylight savings and whatnot, there's some days which have 23 hours. There are some days which have 25 hours, and then once you move beyond that, is just you can't tell how many days are in a month. It depends on the month. Different months have different days, and that's so obvious. So once you start getting to that stage, you need to be inclusive of what you're doing all these calculations, but what are they relative to, right? So let me quickly demonstrate here with an example. We'll find the total of a duration in months with and without taking DST into account. So we have a duration, we create a new duration, which is 2,756 hours long, and we find the total relative to the 1st of January, midnight, right? But in Rome, right? So it's in the time zone Europe, Rome, and in months. And so that comes to this value. And if we find the same in months, but relative to just 2021st January, now you notice that the time is default to midnight, and the time zone is default to no time zone, which is UTC, right? So no daylight savings, nothing. And the answer is something different. The answer is a little less because there were a little more hours per month because there was no daylight savings. In Rome, there is daylight saving. In UTC, there's no daylight saving. So the answer is different. And if you're taking this value and multiplying it by, I don't know, thousands of dollars, however you're charging per month, then the difference is significant. A example that I have for this is that a lot of us even work in companies that pay us a fixed amount per month, right? And no matter how many days are in the month. But if you take an unpaid vacation day, the money that they cut from your salary is it's the fraction of the time that you didn't come. So if you take a single unpaid vacation day in a February where there's 28 days only, then you're losing more money than on a January with 31 days. So if you have to choose between taking a holiday on the 31st of January versus the 1st of February, people would choose to take it on the 31st of January because given how large your salary is, it's probably a big difference. So yeah, these things are important. Take them into account. And now that you have these number values, you just got to round them. Rounding for the win. Sometimes we're paid for a round figure. We can't just multiply these fractions with each other. But also, there's some interesting use cases. The final value can, of course, be rounded up or down depending on the contract. Most of the times you just go up, but yeah, sometimes you don't charge by a single unit, right? You don't charge by an hour or a year, no, not a year, an hour or a day or a month, but you charge by a number of units, right? So, for example, you charge for every 30 minutes, you charge for every 15 minutes, you charge, for example, when we talk about charging per day, we don't really charge per day, we charge per 8 hours. I mean, nobody works 24 hours directly, right? So all these come into this category. And once you're talking about this case, it's a bit more powerful. So now you get to see a little bit of that side of Temporal, where you can't just total this. So there's a more complicated method to deal with this more complicated use case. It's called round. So you can call the round method. So let's say that you are talking to some immigration lawyer and you have to, I don't know, move to some other country, and that immigration lawyer charges per 5 minutes. So if you talk to them for 6 minutes, uh, and the smallest unit minutes, the rounding increment is 5, right? Because they're charging 5 minutes, and the rounding mode is ceiling because they need to go up. You get 10 minutes, and so now if you do the total, you realize that you have to pay for the double than you would have if you just uh, had spoken a little bit quickly and avoided 10 minutes, right? I mean, it's not just true for lawyers. I think if you're going to a therapist that charges per 30 minutes, for example, or 15 minutes, things like these happen. Some doctors charge by also how much time uh, they give you. So yeah, this is the use case for this. Now step 6 is profit. Once you have this value, you can round that, you can multiply that by whatever rate you have, and you can charge that money, earn that money, and profit. We have a quick assignment for you, so I'd like to actually quickly step away from my talk. I hope you can see this. Uh, can people see this? I hope you can see this. But this is a quick playground that we have. I'll drop this link into the chat room in just a second. But it's a quick playground that was created for you. You can see a job application form on the right side. You can fill in your name, your date of birth. I can try that real quick. I can say that I was born in 2002, so I'm just 18 years old. My company is Italia. I worked here from maybe 2016, so from a very young age to last week. So I've worked there for 4 years, 9 months, and I want to take an interview on this date. So in 11 days, or maybe yeah, some other day. Okay, this is a great application, right? So if you see there, it's a React application, but you don't need to really go into the React. The core logic of this is in 3 functions. There's a function to calculate the age, which is written down in Moment.js. There is the function to calculate the time to the interview that's written down in Luxon. And there is a function to calculate your job experience, which is written down using JavaScript date, which is the worst of these 3. Now, your job is to rewrite all 3 of these functions, maybe comment that out or something, and write them all in Temporal. There is a link to the Temporal documentation in all of these. You have me on chat, you have me on Twitter, everywhere. You can ask as many questions as you want. The task is to write all of them in Temporal and see how it works and get a taste. The Temporal proposal is already here, I think, right? It's already added to this, so you can just import it and start working, and you can just fork this. So I'll send you the link to this. But yeah, just to quickly finish over, that's my presentation. Okay, it's still loading. Okay. Links to the future and the present are here. So there's a link to the temporal polyfill, to the NPM, if you will. This is the one that we worked on. There is a link to the V8 issue for tracking the progress on temporal. You can refresh this link every 5 minutes to see if there's any progress, which is what I do. There's a link to SpiderMonkey for Firefox and JavaScript 4 for Safari, GNOME Web, all these. There's also, if you use Core.js for polyfills, it's a popular library for polyfills. There is a tracking issue on that repository as well. And that's a link to the Temporal V2 repository that I talked about. There's a bunch of ideas that we put in ourselves that we like. You can put in any ideas that you like into there if you have any. And you can also feel free to pick up any of the ideas that we had and start working on them. Maybe you can make a module for it. Maybe you can make a new proposal for it. Whatever you prefer. Just want to quickly thank a bunch of people who've been really helpful and amazing. All the Temporal champions, apart from me, have been a great help. The Moment.js maintainers, just awesome. Thank you so much. Temporal Stage 3 reviewers for helping us get to Stage 3, the ECMA 262 editors who finished up and helped us finish the spec. The whole EJS organizers and PCs, of course, are the best people out there. And I also really want to thank Olga for finishing up that playground that you saw and also helping me out with the talk. And most importantly, thanks to you all for sitting so calmly. And I hope to talk to you soon.
Well, first of all, great talk. I'm awestruck as always, and congrats on Stage 3. I remember how you said the last talk that in a year it will be in production. Well, not quite yet, but very far.
Yeah, I really hope that we could do faster. There were a few roadblocks on the way, but we tried our best, and hopefully it's almost there, right? So, yeah.
So we do have some questions. They're actually great.
Okay, that's interesting.
So I will read them for you. Alexander is asking that, do you know anything about bringing this great proposal to other languages? Because he heard like it may be pushed to Java or something.
So that's really interesting. It's really complicated and it's really interesting. There's a lot of cross pollination here already. We took a lot of ideas from Java. As all of you Java developers might be knowing, there's a new date stuff in Java. I think it's GSR 310, but it adds new date functionality that we borrowed heavily from. We also borrowed from things from the .NET DateTime stuff. We borrowed stuff from C++'s the AbSeal. So there's a lot of pollination that came to us, right? And then there's of course things like calendar support that we did ourselves. So through popularizing this idea of calendars and through popularizing ideas of custom calendars, like I don't know, the stock exchange calendar or Mars calendar, and whatever you prefer, right? And also through writing this standard RFC, I hope that more languages would pick these things up. Of course, both on TC39 and IETF, we're open to any collaboration with anyone. But yeah, it's no promises. But hopefully, we'll see some of these features dropping in other ecosystems really soon.
About the standard, I didn't quite get it. So you wrote the new standard, like you're an individual standard maker, and I mean the standard for additional time zones and additional calendars. But how is it going to be pushed like to ISO? Are there plans to do so?
One thing I can do is I can answer some of the questions from the chat. So I see the question that I just answered by Alexander. There's another question by Maria, which is, what about using it now? So there is a polyfill. Yes, thank you. The is the one that I linked on the slides. It's also an NPM. It's all just proposal hyphen. That's actually the only polyfill right now that works perfectly. You can use it wherever you like. It's also used in the code sandbox that we pushed. It's not completely production ready yet. In that it's not it's not fast enough in many cases as we'd like it to be. It's not completely as small as you'd like it to be, for example, but it's getting there. I think the plan, but it's pretty stable and it's supported by the official champions group. So I think you can be certain that it's. There's many plans about it. Maybe soon it might be moved some other place. Maybe Moment.js. People would pick it up and work on this instead. But yeah, that polyfill already exists, is supported. So yeah, that's the answer for that.
Well, thank you, and it's great to have you back. So we have another question. Let me tell you. Let me ask you. So,
Okay,
how
so
close do you think?
sorry, I do on thank you, but not anything else. But yeah, thanks, Maria. Another thing that I see you mentioned was that uh, I think it was about moment in the polyfill. So yeah, I think if you're talking about the file, like the file for the assignment, it does include moment. It's currently working on moment. The idea is that you'd remove that code and start working on your own code in Temporal, and you can compare both of the code examples and see which ones you like better.
Well, I guess no more questions from the chat. And we have like a minute left. Oh, Marie is writing something, but maybe you can quickly answer my question first. How close do you think the Moment API is to the standard? So will it be very easy for the Moment users to migrate?
I'm sorry, I see another question, which is actually a good question and a really interesting one. So I think Ekaterina is the name, but yeah, you talked about calendar support and unexpected calendars. That is a big problem that we have talked about. It's there's complete documents that have written down that we've written down that have been written in temporal and so on for this exact problem. That's what we call the unexpected calendar problem, where there's a calendar in you're getting the input from, I don't know, some API or maybe uh, some library, and it's in a calendar that you did not expect. The idea is that hopefully if you're writing in temporal, you're not write any code that is specific to a single calendar. But if you're doing that, then that's possibly a problem, yes. However, it's something that we considered lower priority for temporal. I think that JavaScript is a language focuses more on interfaces and on internationalization and things like that than big server side use cases. So I think it's a trade-off that we made, right? On one hand, uh, all the calendars in equal ground is good for other calendars, but then it's bad for these edge cases. So hopefully, everybody who's using something that can return any calendar would be careful enough to make sure that they write code that respects these calendars.
Thank you very much, Ujjwal. And unfortunately, I had to cut you right here. And you can continue, and you guys, dear viewers, can continue with the speaker zone, with the discussion zone in Zoom. You have links in your chat. Thank you, Ujjwal. Thank you, Olga.